Your eyes snap open to darkness. It's that deep stillness just before dawn in Missouri, 1866. The old farmhouse creaks around you. Outside, even the rooster hasn't started his morning complaints. Your chest aches with a familiar, dull throb from the bullet lodged in your right lung. It's been a resident there for 2 years now, and the doctors say it'll probably stay forever. It hurts when you breathe deep. It hurts when the weather changes. Right now, it just plain hurts. Lying there, you flex your fingers, instinctively feeling for the revolver that's never more than an arm's reach away. It's not like today, where the scariest thing under your bed might be a dust bunny. Back then, under your bed could be a Union soldier waiting to end your life. You're Jesse James. You're just 18 years old, and you're about to become the most wanted man in America. When the Civil War ended in 1865, it didn't really end for you. How could it? You grew up right here on this hemp farm in Missouri with your older brother Frank and little sister Susan. Your daddy, Robert, died chasing gold in California when you were only 3, leaving your mama Zorelda to raise you kids alone. And let me tell you, she raised you with a fierce, burning Southern pride. She was a tough woman, married 3 times, and taught you that the cause of the Confederacy was a righteous one. Then, the war came right to your doorstep. Missouri was a border state, a hornet's nest of divided loyalties. Your family was staunchly pro-Confederate. When you were 15, Union militiamen raided your farm, looking for Frank, who had joined a Confederate guerrilla group. They interrogated your family, and things got ugly. That day, something inside you hardened. The war wasn't some distant conflict anymore. It was personal. The very next year, at 16, you followed Frank and joined the notorious bushwhackers, led by Bloody Bill Anderson. Life as a bushwhacker wasn't glorious. It was brutal, savage guerrilla warfare. You learned to ride hard, shoot straight, and kill without hesitation. You saw things, did things, that would haunt a man for a lifetime. In one infamous incident, the Centralia Massacre, you and your fellow guerrillas, disguised as Union soldiers, stopped a train carrying unarmed Union troops on leave. What followed was a cold-blooded execution of over 20 men. This wasn't war. This was murder, and you were right in the middle of it. The lines between soldier and outlaw had already blurred into nothing. So when General Lee surrendered at Appomattox, what were you supposed to do? Go home and become a farmer? Shake hands with the very men you'd been trying to kill for years, the men who had brutalized your family? The federal government offered amnesty to Confederate soldiers, but not to guerrillas like you. To them, you weren't a soldier. You were a criminal. So, you remained an outsider, a man without a country, with a price on your head and a fire in your belly. The war may have been over, but your fight was just beginning. On February 13, 1866, you and a dozen other former bushwhackers rode into Liberty, Missouri. It was a cold day, and the streets were quiet. You all walked into the Clay County Savings Association, drew your guns, and everything changed. This wasn't a skirmish. It was America's first ever daylight, peacetime bank robbery. You made off with over $60,000 in cash and bonds. In the chaos, an innocent bystander, a young college student, was shot and killed. You had crossed a new line. You were no longer a guerrilla fighter for a lost cause. You were now officially an outlaw. The James Younger gang was born. The newspapers, hungry for sensational stories, turned you into a modern-day Robin Hood. They painted you as a dashing avenger, stealing from the rich, Yankee-owned banks and railroads, and giving to the poor, downtrodden Southerners. It was a romantic tale, but the reality was far grittier. The money didn't go to the poor. It lined your pockets and funded your life on the run. You weren't a hero. You were a killer and a thief, but you were becoming a legend. And a legend is a very hard thing to kill. Remember that pain. You can almost hear her saying it, your mother's voice ringing in your ears after Union soldiers raided your family farm. They didn't just take things, they took a piece of your soul. They dragged your stepfather from the house, threw a rope over a tree branch, and hung him until he was nearly dead. And then they turned on you, a 15-year-old kid. They whipped you until your back was a raw, bloody mess. Remember what they did to us? She asked. Oh, you remember. You remember every single second. Those Union militants, they called them Jayhawkers, swarmed through Missouri like a plague of locusts. They were a storm that didn't just pass through. It tore everything apart. They burned bonds, stole livestock, and left a trail of death and destruction. They flipped your entire world upside down, turning fields of green into fields of ash. And now the war is supposedly over. Everyone is just expected to, what? Shake hands and pretend it never happened. Forget the lynchings, the burnings, the whippings. No, not a chance. To really understand, you need a picture of what Missouri was like during the Civil War. Forget what you've seen in movies with neat lines of soldiers marching on a battlefield. This wasn't that. This was chaos. This was neighbor turning against neighbor. A midnight ambush on a quiet country road. The person you grew up playing with could suddenly become the one setting fire to your home while you slept inside. Missouri was officially a Union state, but its heart, its soul, beat with a Confederate drum. That deep, violent split turned the whole state into a bloody, unpredictable free-for-all. Imagine walking into town for something as simple as a bag of flour. You wouldn't know who to trust. The storekeeper, the blacksmith, the man sipping coffee in the corner any. One of them could be an informant. The wrong word to the wrong person wasn't just a social mistake. It could be a death sentence. Someone might sidle up to you and say you talk like a Southern boy, and in that split second, you'd have to figure out if that was a friendly observation or a threat just before a knife found your ribs. That was daily life. Constant tension, constant fear. Into this brutal landscape, guerrilla fighters rose from the shadows on both sides. The pro-Union forces were the Jayhawkers, the very men who had terrorized your family. On the Confederate side, they were known as and let me be clear, these weren't honorable soldiers in crisp uniforms, following the rules of war. These were hardened, merciless men, fighting a dirty war in the woods and back roads. They gave no quarter, and they certainly expected none in return. This was about survival and revenge, pure and simple. Your older brother, Frank, he was just 18 when he rode off to join William Quantrill's bushwhackers. He saw it as the only way to fight back, to get some measure of justice for what had been done. You, at just 15, tried to go with him. You were ready. You had the fire in your belly. The memory of that whip burned into your back. But they turned you away. Too young, they said. Can you even imagine the irony? Too young to join the fight, but not too young for that same fight to come to your home and nearly destroy your family. This wasn't just a war for you anymore. It was personal. Every raid, every skirmish, reported in whispers, was a reminder of the debt that needed to be paid. The lines between soldier and civilian had been erased, and the rules of civilized society were long gone. The government that was supposed to protect you had sent men to torture you. The law was just a word used by the powerful to justify their cruelty. In a world like that, what does a boy with a score to settle do? He doesn't forget, he waits, he gets stronger, and he makes his own law. And so, when another chance came to join the fight, when the famous guerrilla leader Bloody Bill Anderson came recruiting, this time you weren't turned away. This time, you were exactly what they were looking for. Young, angry, and with a burning need for vengeance. This is where your story truly begins, not as a soldier in an army, but as a rider in the whirlwind, a ghost of vengeance haunting the Missouri hills. This is the story of how a 15-year-old farm boy, pushed to the absolute edge, became the most feared outlaw in American history, Jesse James. When you finally did join up at 16, riding with Fletch Taylor's squad, the other guerrillas mocked you. They called you the baby, said you didn't have the stomach for it. But that changed fast after your first kill. One of your fellow soldiers would later say, you were the keenest and cleanest fighter in the command. That's high praise in a group where survival depended entirely on your willingness to pull the trigger first. Most of the guerrillas in this squad were under 21, including a guy named Archie Clement, an 18-year-old who became one of your most important mentors. These weren't experienced soldiers following orders. These were essentially teenagers with guns and a massive grudge. and they were all effectively teaching each other how to be ruthless. Think about this for a second. What were you doing at 16? Probably playing video games, worrying about homework, maybe trying to get a driver's license. Jesse James was learning the most efficient ways to kill a man. This wasn't some structured war with rules of engagement. This was pure, brutal survival. Every barn and stream became a potential battlefield. Every civilian you met was either an ally or a target. You quickly learned to sleep with one eye open, to trust no one outside your immediate circle, and to shoot first and never bother asking questions later. Either you kill them or they kill you was the mantra. The constant danger and violence of Civil War era Missouri was the perfect, albeit terrifying, training ground for the brutal outlaw you were destined to become. In the summer of 1864, you suffered your first serious injury. You were trotting along on horseback with your brother when you spotted a really nice saddle hanging on a fence. Your own saddle was in terrible condition, so you decided to take it. But just as you put your hands on it, bang, a bullet pierced your chest. The pain was so intense, you reportedly told a friend that you wanted the Unionists to just capture you and end your life right there. But incredibly, the bullet missed your vital organs, and within a month, you were back in the saddle, ready to fight again. And just so we're clear, not even the bullet that would famously remain lodged in your lung for the rest of your life. That one came later, because apparently, one near-fatal chest wound just wasn't enough for young Jesse James. In October 1864, your mentor, the infamous Bloody Bill Anderson, finally met his end in an ambush. His death marked a turning point. You and your brother Frank temporarily went your separate ways. Frank rode off to Kentucky to join up with General Quantrill, while you, under the command of another ruthless guerrilla, Archie Clement, headed for Texas. But the war wasn't finished with you yet. Near Lexington, Missouri, you were just 17 years old when you tried to surrender. In that moment of vulnerability, a Union soldier shot you. The bullet tore through your chest, lodging itself deep inside your right lung. It was a wound that would never fully heal, a piece of lead you'd carry for the rest of your days. The recovery was long and agonizing, stretching on for several excruciating months. While you lay there, gasping for breath, the Civil War finally shuddered to a halt. April 1865. The guns fell silent. 4 years of brutal conflict had ripped America apart, leaving a scar that would take generations to fade. The Union had won, but at a staggering cost. 620,000 soldiers from both North and South had perished. For the Confederate States, it was a bitter, humiliating defeat. Your home state of Missouri was a wasteland. The war had been especially cruel here. Imagine this: nearly 1/3 of the population was gone, killed in battle, murdered in their own homes, or simply forced to flee the relentless guerrilla warfare that had turned neighbor against neighbor. It was a landscape of ghosts and ashes. By the end of 1865, you and Frank finally made your way back to the family farm. You were 18 years old, a veteran of a brutal, irregular war, with a permanent, painful reminder lodged in your lung. The official war was over. But for you, Jesse James, the fight was just beginning. You had watched your cause, the cause you'd bled for, go down in flames. You came home to find your family, like so many others in the South, left with absolutely nothing. The sting of defeat and the harsh realities of Reconstruction didn't sit right with you. It felt like an injustice. A burning sense of vengeance began to smolder deep within you. The war had shattered your country, destroyed your home, and left your family destitute. Surrender. That word wasn't in your vocabulary. You couldn't just lay down your arms and accept this new world. You had to keep fighting, not for a government or an army, but for your own sense of justice, for revenge. The war had ended, but Jesse James's war was about to begin. The war was over, but for me and my brother Frank, the fight was just beginning. It was the winter of 1865. We were back on the family farm, but the land was barren, and so were our pockets. The conflict had taken everything from us, from our family, and I was burning to get it all back. What really got under my skin, though, seeing those Union soldiers still strutting around on our soil, acting like they owned the place. I knew I had to do something. not just to provide, but to protect what little we had left. So, I started thinking. We needed a plan, a big one, and that's when it hit me. Where was all the money? It was in the banks. Even down here in the South, those banks were stuffed with Northern wealth, Union money. Robbing them, it felt like the perfect way to hit back, to take what was ours from the very people who had ruined us. It was a statement, and the best part, back then, banks were sitting ducks, with barely any security to speak of. It was almost too easy. With peace officially declared, Frank and I reconnected with some of our old comrades from the war. A fella named Archie Clement was leading a group of like-minded men, and we fit right in. We were all bound by a shared past and a burning desire for, well, let's call it justice. Our first target was chosen, and it was a bold one. On a freezing cold day, February 13th, 1866, we rode into Liberty, Missouri. Our destination, the Clay County Savings Association. Think about that name for a second. The bank in a town called Liberty. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the message. What we did next would go down in history as the first ever armed bank robbery in broad daylight during peacetime America. We didn't sneak in under the cover of darkness. No, we stormed that bank right in the middle of the day. We burst through the doors, guns drawn, shouting our demands. You can imagine the scene, the teller's hands flying up, the customers frozen in terror. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. We knew exactly what we were there for. We grabbed everything we could, stuffing bags with cash. When the dust settled and we rode out of town, we'd made off with $60,000. To give you an idea of what that means, that's almost $1 million in today's money. It was a fortune. But our escape wasn't clean. As we galloped away, a young college student, an innocent bystander, was caught in the crossfire and killed. Suddenly, we weren't just robbers. We were killers. We had blood on our hands. But in my mind, in our minds, this was never just a simple robbery. This was an act of defiance. It was a continuation of the war, fought on a new battlefield. Every dollar we stole was a blow against the North, a piece of what they had taken from us. This was our revenge. And it was only the beginning. The bank owner, a staunch unionist, was absolutely furious. He slapped a $5,000 bounty on our heads, a fortune back then, for anyone who could bring us in. Suddenly, our names were plastered in newspapers all across Missouri. For the very first time, I saw my own name, Jesse James, staring back at me from a wanted poster. That was it. My path was chosen. There was no turning back now, no going home. But just as this new life was beginning, tragedy ripped my world apart. On December 13th, 1866, they got him. Archie Clement, my mentor, my brother-in-arms, my best friend. The state militia gunned him down. I was shattered. It felt like a piece of me died with him, and the grief was a long, dark tunnel. But emerging from that darkness, something inside me had shifted. With Archie gone, the reins of the gang fell to me. I took them. I rose to power. The entire nation would soon feel the weight of that decision, though no one, not even me, knew it at the time. The months after Archie's death were a blur of action and anger. We kept hitting targets, continuing the fight in our own way. Bank heists became our calling card. Over the next 2 years, we weren't just reacting anymore. We were planning, perfecting our methods, getting bolder with every job. We were becoming professionals. Early in March of 1868, a new plan took shape. Frank Cole, younger, for other old guerrillas, and I set our sights on a bank in Russellville, Kentucky. This time was different. The Clay County job had been about a message, about politics. Russellville, that was about the money, about the life. I was starting to get a taste for it, the thrill of being an outlaw. We didn't just ride in guns blazing. We watched the town for days, learning its rhythms, its routines. We scouted the bank, noting every entrance, every window, every face. When the moment was right, we moved like ghosts. The heist was fast, but not clean. A local man was shot in the chaos. We rode out of Russellville with $9,000 in bills and another $3,000 in gold coin. It was a massive score, the kind of money that changed things, the kind of money that sealed our reputations and our fates. We were no longer just former soldiers. We were the most wanted men in America. Have you ever heard of a heist driven by revenge? Not just for money, but for something far more personal. This is the story of Jesse James and the day his thirst for vengeance led to a fatal mistake. The robbery of the Daviess County Savings Association in Gallatin, Missouri, wasn't just another crime. It was the act that would cement his infamous reputation and reveal the burning hatred that fueled him. Picture this. It's December 7th, 1869, a cold winter day. Around 12:30 in the afternoon, Jesse James and his gang ride into The cold, hard steel of a revolver appears in his hand. He cocks the hammer, the click echoing in the silent room. Then he speaks, and his words send a shiver down the spine of everyone present. "Cox caused the death of my brother, Bill Anderson," he declares, his voice low and menacing, "and I am bound to have my revenge." Who was this Cox? The small amount of money they stole was nothing compared to the price paid. But in Jesse's mind, the mission was a success. He rode away believing he had finally avenged bloody Bill Anderson. He had no idea he'd just murdered an innocent man, a husband and father, leaving a family devastated and a town in mourning. After the Gallatin bank robbery went horribly wrong, something shifted. It wasn't just another crime. It was the moment the name Jesse James first appeared in newspapers branded as an outlaw. The governor of Missouri, Thomas Crittenden, was furious and put a substantial reward on my head. Things were getting serious. Honestly, after that tragic day, I could have easily faded into history, just another forgotten criminal from a chaotic time. But that's not what happened. And the reason for that, surprisingly, boils down to one man, John Newman Edwards. You see, Edwards was the founder and editor of the Kansas City Times. He was a man with a powerful voice and a very specific agenda. Without him, the legend of Jesse James would have never been born. Edwards was a fierce supporter of the old Confederate cause. And after the war, he was desperately looking for a way to keep its spirit alive, to push back against a new order. And then, he found me. He saw an opportunity. Following the Gallatin incident, Edwards reached out. He offered me a platform, a way to speak directly to the people. He started publishing my letters in his newspaper. At first, these letters were all about defending myself, proclaiming my innocence in the Gallatin affair, and trying to clear my name. I wanted the public to hear my side of the story, not just the official version from the authorities. As we continued our strange partnership, the letters began to change. They became more than just personal defenses. They became political statements. With Edwards's guidance, I started writing about the bigger picture. I praised the values of the Confederacy and spoke out against the politicians and policies I saw as my enemies. Edwards was a genius at this. He knew exactly how to frame the narrative. He was masterfully transforming me from a common thief into something much more powerful, a symbol of Southern resistance. A modern-day Robin Hood fighting for the common man against a corrupt government. He painted a picture of me that was larger than life. He once wrote this incredible description of me and my brother, Frank. He said, "There is always a smile on his lips and a graceful word or compliment for all with whom he comes in contact. Jesse laughs at everything, Frank at nothing at all. Jesse is light-hearted, reckless, devil-may-care. Frank, sober, sedate, a dangerous man, always in ambush in the midst of society." That description stuck. People loved it. Edwards created this image of the charming, daring rogue, the smiling outlaw, who was fighting for what he believed in. He contrasted me with my brother Frank, making us a legendary duo of light and shadow. He wasn't just reporting news. He was crafting a myth. He turned my actions into acts of defiance and my words into a rallying cry for those who felt left behind and voiceless after the war. So, while the law saw me as a criminal, a growing number of people, thanks to John Newman Edwards, started to see me as a hero. He gave me a voice when I had none and turned my desperate struggle for survival into a political crusade. It was a strange and powerful alliance, a newspaper editor and an outlaw, working together to shape public opinion and create a legend that would outlive us both. He proved that the pen, in many ways, can be just as mighty as the pistol. But remorse is a luxury you can't afford. In a split second, you're a blur of motion, sprinting toward the express car as your crew fans out, securing the perimeter. With a powerful leap, you're inside, ripping off your mask. The revolver in your hand feels steady as you aim it at the terrified guard. Your voice is a low growl. "Open that safe, or give me the key. If you don't, I'll blow your brains out." The color drains from the guard's face, his hands trembling as he surrenders the key. Inside the safe, the haul is disappointing only about $2,337, far less than the gang expected. But this was never just about the money. As the robbery unfolds, one of your men turns to the passengers, and his words will echo through history, becoming a cornerstone of your legend. "We aren't petty thieves," he announces. "We are bold robbers. We're robbing the rich to give to the poor, and we have no intention of harming any of you." This single statement begins to craft your public image, not as a common criminal, but as a modern-day Robin Hood, a champion of the South, taking revenge on the wealthy northern powers that wronged you. The entire operation is over in just 10 minutes. 10 minutes that change everything. The railroad company immediately slaps a massive $5,000 reward on your head, dead or alive. Suddenly, your name is on the front page of every newspaper, whispered in saloons and parlors across the country. You've become infamous overnight. And here's the truly wild part of this story. Before you train, robbery wasn't really a thing. You and your gang practically wrote the playbook for the American train heist. Before the James Younger gang, the idea of stopping a moving locomotive in broad daylight during peacetime was unthinkable. It was audacious. It was bold. It was something no one else had the sheer nerve to attempt. You once looked at your brother Frank and said, "Stopping a train is like stopping time itself." For those few minutes, we're in control of everything. You weren't just stealing money. You were seizing control, bending the world to your will, even if only for a moment. You were pioneers of a new kind of outlawry, creating a myth that would outlive the man. You turned a simple act of theft into a grand performance, a rebellion against the powers that be, and in doing so, you etched your name into the very fabric of the American West. The authorities saw you as a menace, a dangerous criminal who needed to be stopped at all costs. But to many ordinary people, especially those who felt crushed by the powerful railroad and banking monopolies, you were something else entirely. You were a symbol of defiance. Every heist was a slap in the face to the establishment, a victory for the common man. Your legend grew with each daring escape, each newspaper headline adding another layer to the myth. You weren't just a robber. You were becoming a folk hero. Last time, we talked about the James Younger gang's first foray into train robbery. Today, We're diving into their second job, where they refined their methods and really started to build their infamous reputation. The gang didn't waste any time. Just 6 months after their first attempt, they were ready to strike again. The date was January 31st, 1874, and the location was Gad's Hill, Missouri. Jesse, Frank, and the younger brothers were all there, ready for a big score. Their planning was much more meticulous this time. The night before the robbery, they noticed several men hanging around the train platform, not wanting any surprises. The gang captured and tied them up to ensure they wouldn't interfere. Their next move was clever. They got their hands on a red flag. In the 1870s, a red flag was the universal railroad signal for danger ahead, a guaranteed way to make a train stop. With their trap set, all they had to do was wait, and wait they did. The train was running an hour and a half late, leaving the gang shivering in the bitter January cold. But their patience paid off. When the locomotive finally chugged into view, one of the outlaws stood by the tracks and waved the red flag. As expected, the train slowed to a halt. The conductor, likely annoyed and curious, stepped out to see what the problem was. That's when the gang sprang into action. In an instant, one of the outlaws grabbed the conductor by the collar, shoved a revolver in his face, and growled, "Stand still, or I'll blow the top of your head off," to make sure no one on board got any heroic ideas. The outlaw then yelled toward the passenger cars, "If a shot is fired out of the car, I'll kill the conductor." The message was crystal clear: cooperate, or the conductor pays the price. Just like in their previous robbery, the gang wore Ku Klux Klan-style masks to hide their identities. This created an atmosphere of pure terror. As they boarded, the express messenger, who was in charge of the safe, was waiting inside with his revolver drawn. He was ready for a fight. When a masked face appeared in his doorway, he took aim, but his courage vanished in a heartbeat. It wasn't just one bandit, it was two. One of them pointed a rifle right at the messenger's chest and demanded, "Give me your pistol." The messenger, wisely choosing life over a brave but fatal last stand, immediately surrendered his weapon and the key to the safe. The gang quickly cleaned out the vault, grabbing about $1,080. But they weren't done yet. They then moved through the passenger cars. But this is where the story gets really interesting and helps explain their Robin Hood image. As they went from person to person, they weren't just robbing everyone indiscriminately. They were looking for something specific. They carefully inspected the hands of every male passenger. They announced to the terrified crowd that they had no intention of robbing working class men or any of the ladies on board. Their targets were the gentlemen in hats, the wealthy businessmen, and politicians of the era. They would look at a man's hands. If they were calloused and rough from manual labor, they'd move on. But if they were soft, it meant he was a man of wealth, and his money and jewelry were fair game. This act was part performance, part genuine belief. The James Younger gang was deliberately crafting an image of themselves as champions of the common man, fighting back against the rich and powerful railroad barons and bankers who many Southerners felt were exploiting them after the Civil War. By robbing the rich and pointedly sparing the poor, they weren't just criminals. They were becoming folk heroes. This robbery at Gad's Hill was a masterclass in both crime and public relations, cementing their legendary status in the annals of the Wild West. And your gang makes a swift getaway, vanishing before the train even chugs back to life. This was your second train robbery, and you're feeling invincible. With each job, your gang gets more skilled, bolder, and more famous. You're becoming legends. But while you're celebrating, a storm is gathering on the horizon. Someone is plotting to bring you down. Remember that bank robbery back in Corydon, Iowa, in '71? The bank's owner wasn't just going to let it go. He hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, a name that would soon become your worst nightmare. And it wasn't just him. After the Gad's Hill train robbery, the Adams Express Company, the owner of that safe you cracked, also called in the Pinkertons. The hunt was officially on. They were dead set on capturing the James Younger gang, and to do that, they went straight to the top. They turned to the head of the agency himself, Alan Pinkerton. In those days, Alan Pinkerton was the most famous private detective in America. He'd made a name for himself during the Civil War, famously protecting Abraham Lincoln and foiling an assassination attempt. As a staunch Unionist who despised slavery, he founded his agency back in the 1850s. Think of the Pinkerton Agency as the forerunner to the FBI and the CIA. Their entire business was spying on and tracking professional criminals. They were the best in the business. One of their biggest successes was in 1868 when they tracked down and dismantled the Reno Gang. The Renos were the original train robbers, the first to pull off such heists in peacetime America. They were the pioneers, until you and your gang came along and elevated train robbery to an art form. So now, you have the most formidable detective agency in the country, led by its legendary founder, focusing all its resources on one single target, you. This wasn't just a cat-and-mouse game anymore. It was a clash of titans. On one side, the most daring outlaws in the West. On the other, the most relentless lawmen money could buy. The stage was set for an epic confrontation that would go down in history. Who do you think will come out on top? The outlaws who perfected the heist, or the detectives who perfected the hunt? This is where the story truly heats up, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Pinkerton, never one to back down from a challenge, accepts the fee, a staggering $1,000 to capture the entire James Younger gang. To lead this high-stakes operation, he chooses one of his best and brightest agents, a man named Joseph Witcher. Witcher's objective seems straightforward enough: travel to Clay County, Missouri, the heart of James's territory. Being hunted was the one thing that got under my skin more than anything else. But you know, time has a way of smoothing the roughest edges. I started to calm down, and my thoughts turned to something more personal, something more lasting. I decided to marry my first cousin, Zerelda Mims. Yes, she shared the same name as my dear mother. We called her Z. She was the love of my life, and together, we would eventually bring 2 beautiful children into this world. Our honeymoon was supposed to be a quiet time, a new beginning. But even then, the whispers followed us. Rumors started flying that my gang and I had knocked over several stagecoaches. It seemed that even in the midst of celebrating my marriage, the pull of the outlaw life was a current too strong to resist. I was a man of 2 worlds, trying to build a home while still riding the wild frontier of my own making. This wasn't just a failed case. It was a personal blow, one of the biggest failures his agency had ever faced, and he was determined to handle it himself. This was no longer just business for Pinkerton. It was about revenge. Revenge against me, Jesse James, the outlaw who had outsmarted his best man and embarrassed his entire organization. The hunt was about to become a personal vendetta. The taste of victory was still fresh, and my gang, the James Younger boys, we weren't about to lay low. We kept the pressure on. Our next big score was a train near Muncie, Kansas, on December 8, 1874. It was a clean job, just how we liked it. I had successfully outmaneuvered and humiliated the formidable Pinkerton Detective Agency, an organization that was supposed to be unstoppable. I had wealth, fame, and love, standing in my boots. Who wouldn't feel invincible? It felt like I was playing a game and winning at every turn. But the thing about games is, they're never over until they're over. And this game was far from won. My old enemies, the ones I'd beaten and embarrassed, were regrouping. They were preparing to strike back, and they were planning something so brutal, so shocking, that not even I could have seen it coming. The murder of Joseph Witcher and the public humiliation that followed was a wound that Alan Pinkerton refused to let heal. For the head of the famed detective agency, this was a personal crusade. The rules no longer applied. He decided that the end would now justify any means. If he had to operate outside the law to bring me down, so be it. The gloves were off. He was no longer a detective trying to solve a case. He was a man bent on vengeance, ready to burn down the world to get to me. Everything came to a boil on the cold, dark night of January 25, 1875. A team of Pinkerton agents, dispatched by Alan Pinkerton himself, crept through the darkness and surrounded my family's farm, my home. They weren't there to make an arrest. They weren't there to serve a warrant. In a move that shattered every line of legal and moral conduct, they hurled an incendiary device through the window. It was essentially a primitive bomb, a ball of iron filled with flammable material, designed to explode and set the house ablaze. They were no longer lawmen. They were assassins, and they had just declared war, not just on me, but on my entire family. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you're captivated by these stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have so many more tales to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one. See you next time. Picture this. You come home, but not to the warmth and comfort you remember. Instead, you're met with the roar of flames engulfing your childhood house. The air is thick with smoke and the gut-wrenching sound of your mother screaming in agony, her arm horrifically injured. Your younger brother is lying there, fatally wounded. This isn't a scene from some dark fiction. This was a brutal reality. And why? Because the Pinkerton Detective Agency, led by Alan Pinkerton, decided that capturing Jesse James was worth any price, even the lives of his innocent family. There's an old Missouri saying, "You were mad enough to bite yourself." After this event, that's an understatement. Already seething from the relentless pursuit by Pinkerton's detectives, this tragedy pushed Jesse over the edge. For him, Alan Pinkerton and his agents weren't just lawmen. They were the embodiment of Northern oppression, a force that bent the law to serve the interests of powerful corporations. They were a reminder of the very conflicts that had torn the country apart. Imagine the fury, the sense of powerlessness, when you learned that the agents responsible for this brutal raid, for the death of your brother and the mutilation of your mother, would face no legal consequences. The system that was supposed to deliver justice had turned a blind eye. For Jesse James, this wasn't just an injustice. It was a declaration of war. If the law wouldn't hold them accountable, he would. His vengeance was as swift as it was brutal. On April 12, 1875, Jesse took matters into his own hands. He tracked down Daniel Askew, a neighbor who had collaborated with the Pinkerton agents during the raid. Askew, a former Union militiaman, paid the ultimate price for his involvement. Jesse shot and killed him. This act of cold, calculated revenge sent a chilling message to Allan Pinkerton. This was the final straw. After this, Allan Pinkerton, the legendary detective, the man who had built an empire on capturing outlaws, finally gave up. He officially abandoned the hunt for the James Younger gang. This wasn't just a retreat. It was his greatest professional defeat. Jesse James had outsmarted, outfought, and ultimately outlasted him. Pinkerton's relentless pursuit and the barbaric methods he employed had backfired spectacularly, shattering his once invincible reputation. The story of Jesse James is often romanticized, painting him as a folk hero, a Robin Hood of the Old West. But the reality is far more complex and darker. This chapter of his life reveals a man driven by deep-seated anger and a thirst for personal vengeance. The raid on his home didn't just fuel his outlaw activities, it defined them. It transformed his fight from one against the system to a deeply personal war against one man, Allan Pinkerton. This conflict highlights a fascinating and violent clash of ideologies in post-Civil War America. On one side, you have the burgeoning force of corporate power and centralized law enforcement, represented by Pinkerton. On the other, the lingering resentments of the South and a fierce, almost primal, resistance to what was seen as outside control, embodied by Jesse James. The legacy of this feud is complicated. Pinkerton's failure led to major reforms in law enforcement and the use of private agencies. As for Jesse James, his legend only grew, cementing his status as one of America's most enduring and controversial figures. Was he a cold-blooded killer or a product of his violent times, a man pushed to the brink by tragedy and injustice? Perhaps he was both. His story serves as a stark reminder that history is rarely black and white, and the line between hero and villain is often blurred by perspective, pain, and the unquenchable desire for revenge. You'd think a botched raid that cost his mother her arm would make the James family lay low. Well, not quite. Jesse's mother, Zerelda, was one tough and savvy woman. Instead of hiding, she turned tragedy into a business opportunity. Can you believe it? Despite losing her arm, she started giving tours of the family farm to curious visitors, showing off all the damage from the bomb. She even sold small rocks from the explosion site as souvenirs for 25 cents apiece. And get this, when she ran out of the real bomb site rocks, she'd just grab some from the yard and keep selling them. Talk about an enterprising spirit. Your mama was a true hustler, Jesse. For the next year, though, Jesse himself did keep a lower profile. The heat from the Pinkerton raid was intense, and he knew he needed to let things cool down before making another move. But the quiet life just wasn't for him. The call of the outlaw life was too strong, and by the summer of 1876, Jesse James was ready to ride again. With Allan Pinkerton finally abandoning his relentless pursuit, Jesse and his gang decided it was time to get back to what they did best: heists. Their next target, a train near Otterville, Missouri. The gang was a who's who of outlaws. You had Jesse and his brother Frank, the ever-reliable Cole and Bob Younger, plus Clell Miller, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell. There was also a newcomer in the ranks named Hobbs Carey. On July 7, 1876, they struck. Now, this is where the story gets really interesting. Why Minnesota? It seems a bit random, right? Why would a gang of Missouri outlaws pack up and head so far north? Well, it turns out they had been planning something massive for over a month, a truly audacious bank heist way up in the land of 10,000 lakes. On the surface, Pulling off another major robbery so soon after the Otterville train job seems completely illogical. It was incredibly dangerous, especially after a heist that had already drawn so much attention. Why risk it all again so quickly? The answer lies in the sheer scale of their ambition. The Minnesota heist wasn't just another job. It was meant to be the biggest score of their careers. They believed the banks up north were flush with cash and less prepared for a raid from a notorious Southern gang. The $8,300 from the train robbery was simply the seed money, the capital they needed to finance the logistics of this grand plan. It would cover their travel, supplies, and everything they needed to scout their target and execute the robbery flawlessly. It was a high-stakes gamble, a classic case of go big or go home. They were betting that the boldness of their plan and the distance from their usual territory would be their greatest advantage. They were about to ride into a situation that would become the most infamous chapter of their story, a showdown that would change the gang forever. It turned out the money wasn't really the point, was it? No, your drive was something else entirely. You wanted to hit the North where it lived, to strike at the very heart of the enemy. The plan, hatched by you and Bob Younger, was to rob the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. Now, this was a bold, almost reckless move. Northfield was a long way from your usual stomping grounds, deep in what you considered enemy territory. Your older brother, Frank, and Cole Younger both tried to talk you out of it. They saw it for what it was, a massive, almost unthinkable risk. But you wouldn't be swayed. Your personal vendetta against the North, it seemed, was bottomless. Why this bank? Why Northfield? It wasn't the richest bank around, not by a long shot. But it had a connection that made it the perfect target for you. The bank was associated with Adelbert Ames. You might remember him as the Unionist governor of Mississippi during Reconstruction. To you, Ames was the living embodiment of everything you despised about Northern rule over the defeated South. Robbing his bank wasn't just about cash. It was a symbolic act of defiance. It was a message. So, the crew was assembled for this audacious job. You were there, of course, along with your brother Frank. The younger brothers were all in. Cole, Jim, and Bob. Rounding out the gang were Clell Miller, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell. 8 men ready to ride into the lion's den. To pull off something this incredible, you knew you needed a meticulous plan. You decided to split into 3 distinct groups. The first group would go inside the First National Bank. The second would act as lookouts, standing guard right outside. The third group's job was crucial. They had to secure your pre-planned escape route. Since the heist was your brainchild, yours and Bob's, it only made sense that you two would be the ones to go inside. You volunteered immediately. Frank decided he'd go in with you. That made 3 for the inside job. Outside, Cole Younger and Clell Miller would take up positions to keep an eye on the town square. They were your first line of defense. If things went sideways, the rear guard, tasked with covering your escape, consisted of Jim Younger, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell. Their job was to make sure the way out stayed clear. The plan was timed down to the minute. Around 1 in the afternoon, you, Frank, and Bob would ride into Northfield first, crossing the bridge that led to the town square. A few minutes later, Cole Younger and Clell Miller would follow you into town. The moment they arrived, your group would dismount and enter the bank. As soon as Cole and Clell were in position outside, Jim's group, the rear guard, would ride into Northfield and station themselves to cover the escape route. The entire town would be covered. Once the robbery was done, all the outlaws would rendezvous at the designated exit point. As a final measure, Bill, Clell, and Bob were tasked with cutting the telegraph lines to slow down any pursuit. Then, the whole gang would ride out, hopefully with a heavy load and a clean getaway. And there was one final, very important rule that everyone agreed on. No citizens were to be killed. It was a strict order. If someone shot at you, you could wound them in return, but under no circumstances was anyone to die. You wanted to send a message, not start a massacre. The stage was set for one of the most infamous bank robberies in American history. You were ready. You believed your plan was flawless. What could possibly go wrong? September 7, 1876. The air in Northfield, Minnesota, was crisp with the promise of autumn. Townspeople went about their day, completely unaware that the most infamous outlaw gang in America, the James Younger Gang, had just ridden into town with robbery on their minds. This single event would shatter their legend and change the course of their lives forever. It all started so smoothly. Jesse James, along with his brother Frank and Bob Younger, crossed the bridge and made their way toward the town square. They casually sat on some crates, just a few more faces in the crowd, waiting for their partners, Cole Younger and Clell Miller, to arrive. Soon enough, the second group trotted into town. At precisely 2 p.m., the plan kicked into action. Jesse, Frank, and Bob walked up to the First National Bank. In a strange oversight, they left the front door slightly ajar as they entered. Cole Younger and Clell Miller arrived moments later. Seeing the bank door open, Clell quickly dismounted and shut it firmly. A seemingly minor action that would have major consequences. With the first part of the plan complete, the two men took up their positions outside, trying their best to look inconspicuous. Clell meandered his horse down the middle of the street, fiddling with his saddle straps, while Cole casually smoked his pipe near the bank's entrance. The final members of the gang, Jim Younger, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell, had already reached their lookout points, waiting calmly on their horses, ready to provide cover. From the outside, everything seemed perfectly normal. But inside the bank, chaos was about to erupt. Stepping into the quiet bank, Jesse, Frank, and Bob found 3 employees: the teller, Alonzo Bunker, the acting cashier, Joseph Lee Haywood, and an accountant named Frank Wilcox. Without a moment's hesitation, the outlaws drew their revolvers. "Throw up your hands," Jesse commanded, his voice cold and steady. "We intend to rob the bank, and if you holler, we will blow your brains out." The threat hung heavy in the air as the 3 outlaws vaulted over the counter, their boots thudding on the wooden floor. Jesse immediately zeroed in on the man he believed held the key to their fortune. He asked Haywood if he was the cashier, but Haywood calmly replied that he wasn't. Jesse then turned to Bunker and Wilcox, asking them the same question, but neither man claimed the title. Frustrated, Jesse turned his attention back to Haywood. "You are the cashier now," he snarled. "Open the safe." But Joseph Lee Haywood, a man of incredible integrity, flatly refused. He would not betray the trust placed in him, not even with a gun pointed at his head. While Jesse was dealing with Haywood's defiance, Frank James headed toward the back room to inspect the vault. Bob Younger kept his pistol aimed at the other 2 bank employees, ensuring they didn't try anything. As Frank was about to enter the vault, Haywood, seeing his chance, lunged for the heavy door, attempting to trap Frank inside. Frank barely managed to scramble out in time, but not without injury. His arm and hand were badly wounded in the struggle. Enraged by this resistance, Bob Younger swung the butt of his revolver, striking Haywood hard on the head. The brave cashier collapsed to the floor. But the outlaws' carefully laid plan was already beginning to unravel. The situation inside the bank was spiraling out of control, and outside, the citizens of Northfield were starting to notice that something was terribly wrong.